The facade of the house in Pasadena was a picture-perfect painting of the American dream. A green lawn, white fences, windows that gleamed under the California sun. To anyone passing by on the street, we were the image of prosperous happiness, a family straight out of a margarine commercial. The house belonged to my son, Marco, a testament to his success, or at least to the image of success he fought so hard to project. But appearances, like well-painted walls, often hide the mold and rot that grow within, in the darkness and silence. Inside, the air was different, cold, stagnant. The luxury of expensive furniture and Persian rugs couldn't fill the emotional void that echoed in every hallway. It was a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of a pendulum clock in the living room, a sound that seemed to count the seconds of my invisibility. I moved through these rooms like a ghost, a shadow making sure that dust never settled on the perfect life that wasn't mine. I am Elena. I am 75 years old. My body feels every one of them, not because of age, but because of the weight I carry on my stooped shoulders. One day, these hands that now tremble as I scrub the floor were firm and agile, capable of transforming simple fabrics into ball gowns and elegant suits. I was a seamstress, an artist. Today, I am just Marco's mother, a silent figure living off the remnants of a small pension, and the false charity of a son who sees me more as a useful burden. My room is the smallest in the house, with a window that looks out onto the neighbor's wall. It is my sanctuary and my prison. It is where I cry in silence, clutching a faded photograph of my late husband, a man who saw stars in my eyes and magic in my hands. He would never have let me disappear like this. Missing him is a physical pain, a constant reminder that I was once loved for who I was, not for what I could do for others. Tuesday afternoon began like all the others. The sound of the front door opening, followed by the hurried footsteps of my 8-year-old granddaughter, Sophia, was the first sign of real life in the house. She was the only light in that place, the only person whose eyes still sparkled when they saw me. But today, her contagious energy had been replaced by a muffled sob, a sound that broke my heart before I even knew the reason. She ran to her mother, my daughter-in-law, showing her the disaster, an ugly tear in her favorite blue tulle dress, the one she planned to wear to the school presentation. The next day, her little face was red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks like a small river of childish despair. The dress, to her, was not just a piece of cloth. It was a dream, a fantasy, and now it was ruined. My daughter-in-law's response was practical and immediate, devoid of the emotion the moment called for. "Don't worry, honey. We'll buy a new one tomorrow morning. This one is beyond repair," she said, barely looking at the damaged fabric. Her words, though not unkind, ignored the depth of Sophia's pain, who didn't want a new dress. She wanted that dress, her favorite, her magical one. Sophia's crying intensified, turning into a high-pitched wail of someone who felt completely misunderstood. It was the pure pain of a child whose small world had just fallen apart. I watched from a distance, from the kitchen doorway, feeling her helplessness as if it were my own. In a world of quick and disposable solutions, no one seemed to understand the value of mending what is broken. It was then that I took a step forward, breaking my self-imposed vow of silence and invisibility. My voice came out lower than I intended, a fragile whisper, but laden with a lifetime of knowledge. "I can fix it, my dear," I said, gently taking the dress from Sophia's hands. "It will be like new, even more beautiful." A drop of hope appeared in my granddaughter's tear-filled eyes. Marco, who had entered the room without my noticing, heard my promise. He was impeccable in his expensive suit, which always seemed a bit too tight, as if it could barely contain his impatience. His eyes, cold and calculating, landed on me, and his forced smile didn't come close to softening the contempt in his tone. "Mother, don't waste your time with that," he said, his voice low but sharp as glass. He looked at me and then at Sophia, ensuring the humiliation was public. "You'll probably just make it worse with those trembling hands of yours. Stop being stubborn. We'll buy her a new and better dress." Every word was a physical blow. The room seemed to spin. The humiliation of being called useless in front of the only person in this world who still looked at me with admiration was overwhelming. I felt the heat rise to my face, a mixture of shame and pain. My already stooped shoulders hunched a little more, as if I wanted to disappear into the floor. For a moment, I almost believed him. I almost dropped the dress and returned to my shadow. But then, I looked at Sophia's face. She wasn't looking at her, father with anger, but at me with a silent plea. Her eyes said, "Please, Grandma, I believe in you." And in that moment, something inside me, an old ember I thought had been extinguished, glowed. A spark of dignity, faint but stubborn, ignited in my chest. I didn't answer Marco. There was nothing to say. Instead, I held the blue dress a little more firmly, gave Sophia a trembling smile, and turned, walking towards my room. The humiliation still burned on my skin, but now it was mixed with a new feeling, determination. That night would not be for tears, but for rescue. Elena's story is just beginning. If you were moved by this start, subscribe to the channel and comment which city you are watching from. We want to get to know each one of you who believes in the power of dignity. That night, my bedroom door closed with a soft click, but to me, it sounded like a vault door locking. I was finally alone with my mission. Marco's insult still echoed in my ears, but instead of paralyzing me, it became fuel. I wasn't going to fix that dress to prove something to him, but to prove to myself that the woman I once was still existed beneath the layers of sadness and submission. Before moving into this house, my life was full of colors and textures. My small studio at the back of our old house was my kingdom. The hum of my sewing machine was the soundtrack to my happiness. My husband, Roberto, always brought me a cup of tea in the late afternoon and admired my work, saying that I wove dreams with my hands. He saw the royalty in me, even when I was covered in threads and pins. When Roberto passed away, a deafening silence took over my life. The house became too big, the colors seemed to fade. Marco, my only son, offered me a place in his home. "You won't be alone, Mom. We'll take care of you," he said. And in my grief, I believed it was a gesture of love. I sold our house, packed away my old sewing machine and a few heirlooms, and moved into the guest room that would become my cell. At first, everything seemed fine. I helped with the children, cooked the family recipes Marco loved so much, but slowly the dynamic changed. My role as a guest turned into that of an unpaid employee. "Mom, since you're home, could you clean the living room?" "Mom, your pension money is safe with me, I'll manage it for you." The subtle criticisms became frequent, always disguised as concern for my slowness or forgetfulness. He isolated me little by little, undermining my confidence, until I began to doubt my own abilities. He controlled my small pension, giving me a paltry amount for personal expenses, claiming he was helping me save. I knew deep down that he was using my money to plug the holes in his unsustainable lifestyle. The financial humiliation was perhaps the most silent and cruel of all, making me completely dependent on him. But that night, none of that mattered. Under my bed, in a dusty wooden box, was my old sewing kit. Opening that box was like opening a portal to the past. The smell of machine oil and old fabric filled the room. Inside, spools of colored thread, silver scissors that belonged to my mother, and a set of needles of all sizes. They were my weapons, the tools of my resurrection. I turned on the small lamp beside my bed, creating an island of light in the darkness of the room. I spread the blue dress across my lap. The tear looked like an open wound in the delicate fabric. My hands trembled, a testament to my age and my nervousness. For a moment, Marco's voice returned. "You'll only make it worse." I closed my eyes tightly, took a deep breath, and thought of Sophia. With a determination I hadn't felt in years, I selected the finest needle. Threading it through the tiny hole was the first battle. My vision was no longer the same, and the tremor in my fingers didn't help. It took several attempts, each a test of my newfound patience. Finally, the thread went through. A small triumph, but one that felt immense. I didn't want to. Just sew the tear. That would be functional, but soulless. That would be what Marco would expect. a practical, invisible job. I wanted to transform the flaw into something beautiful, into a detail that told a story. I wanted Sophia to look at that patch not as a mended defect, but as a mark of magic and love. Then the idea came. A small flower. I looked at the spools of thread and chose a vibrant yellow, like a little sun, and a soft green for the leaves. With the first stitch, my hands seemed to remember the way. The trembling subsided, replaced by a steady, sure rhythm. The seamstress within me was awakening from a long slumber. Each stitch was a meditation, a silent act of rebellion. I wasn't just joining fabric. I was sewing together the pieces of my own dignity. The world outside that circle of light disappeared. There was no Marco, no cold house, no humiliation. There was only me, the needle, the thread, and my granddaughter's dress. The flower began to take shape over the place, where the tear had been. A small wonder of 5 yellow petals with a delicate center and 2 small green leaves. It was simple, but perfect. I transformed the dress's scar into its most charming detail. It was a metaphor for my own hope, that wounds, when treated with love, can become our greatest beauty. I worked for hours, all night long. The pain in my back and neck was real, but I ignored it. Exhaustion was a small price to pay for the sense of purpose that filled me. When the last stitch was made and the knot was tied, I held the dress up to the faint dawn light filtering through the window. It was done. The next morning I didn't feel tired. I felt alive. I waited anxiously for Sophia to wake up, my heart pounding like a young girl's on her first date. When she came out of her room, still sleepy, I was standing in the hallway, holding the dress like an offering. Her eyes widened. First, she looked for the tear, but she couldn't find it. In its place, she saw the little yellow flower. A slow, wondrous smile spread across her face. She took the dress from my hands with a reverence that moved me deeply. "Grandma," she whispered, running her little fingers over the embroidered flower. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She looked at me, and in her gaze there was an admiration so deep, so genuine, that it healed a decade of wounds in my heart. "It's magic, Grandma. You're the best," she shouted, jumping to hug me with all her 8-year-old strength. That hug was an earthquake. It broke the chains of my apathy. It filled me with a strength I thought I had lost forever. The pure, unconditional love of that little creature was the validation I needed. In that moment, as I held her in my arms, a final decision crystallized in my mind. I did not belong in that house. My worth was not determined by my usefulness to Marco. My worth was in my hands, in my history, and in the love I was capable of giving and receiving. Sophia's hug was not just a thank you. It was my liberation. My internal conflict, the battle between the fear of the unknown and the need to save myself, finally had a winner. The fear was still there, a ghost in the corner of the room, but now it was smaller, weaker. The guilt I felt, the doubt of having failed as a mother began to dissipate, replaced by a serene clarity. The external obstacle was Marco. His anger, his manipulation, his dependence on my work and my money. I knew he would fight to keep me under his control, not for love, but for convenience. He would accuse me of ingratitude, selfishness, senility. The war was far from over, but now I had armor woven with the yellow thread of the sun, with my granddaughter's hug, and with the rediscovery of my own identity. I was no longer a silent victim waiting for the end. I was Elena, a seamstress, a grandmother, a woman about to take up the needle and thread to redesign the map of her own life. The connection with Sophia had given me more than a moment of joy. It had given me back my sense of purpose. Her love reminded me that I was still capable of creating beauty, of fixing what was broken, of making a difference. And with that certainty, I was ready to face any storm Marco might create. The next day, during breakfast, I announced my decision. There was no drama in my voice, just the calm of a river that has finally found its course. "Marco, I'm looking for a place of my own. I'm going to move out," I said as I placed A slice of bread on my plate, my hand surprisingly steady. The silence that followed was dense and heavy, broken only by the sound of my knife spreading butter on the bread, an act of normalcy in a moment of rupture. My daughter-in-law looked at me with genuine confusion, not understanding the depth of the current running beneath the calm surface of our family life. Marco, however, understood perfectly. His face went from surprise to a dark fury in a matter of seconds. He slammed his coffee cup on the table with force, making the dark liquid jump and stain the white linen tablecloth. "You what?" he growled, his voice low and threatening. "After everything we've done for you? After welcoming you into our home? This is ingratitude, Mother. Pure ingratitude and selfishness. You wouldn't survive a week alone? Are you getting senile? Is that it?" The accusations were the ones I expected, the weapons he always used to keep me small and dependent. As he continued his furious speech accusing me of embarrassing the family and being an ungrateful burden, I remained silent. I was no longer absorbing his words. Instead, I was thinking about my little secret, a metal cookie tin hidden at the back of my wardrobe. Inside it, there were no cookies, but the money I had saved for years, small savings from my pension that I managed to hide, and the value from the sale of some jewelry from my wedding that Marco didn't know I still had. It was my escape savings, my fund for freedom. In the days and day that followed, as Marco alternated between hostile silence and outbursts of manipulation, I acted in secret. I used a payphone to call real estate agencies. I visited small apartments in modest neighborhoods, places that contrasted sharply with the cold opulence of my son's house. They were small spaces, sometimes smelling of fresh paint and loneliness, but to me, they smelled of fresh air, of possibility. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in an old but well-maintained building, several kilometers away. It had a large window in the living room that let in the afternoon sun, and the neighborhood was vibrant, full of small shops, and the sound of children playing in the street. As I signed the lease with my hard-earned money, I felt a wave of terror and euphoria. For the first time in years, I was the architect of my own destiny. Moving day was discreet. I hired a small moving service and took only my clothes, my personal belongings, and most importantly, my old sewing machine, which was stored in the garage. The first night in the empty apartment was frightening. The silence was different here. It wasn't oppressive. It was a blank space waiting to be filled. I sat on the floor in the middle of the empty room and cried, but they were tears of relief. My first investment was in a second-hand sewing machine, stronger and more reliable than my old one, which I bought at a pawn shop. Setting it up in the corner of the room, near the sunny window, was my inaugural act of independence. It was the planting of my flag in my new territory. The machine was not just an object, it was the promise of a future that I would sow myself. It wasn't long before Marco discovered my new address. He appeared at my door a few days later, his face a mask of restrained fury. He entered without being invited, his expensive eyes scanning my humble sanctuary with disdain. His attention fixed on the sewing machine, the symbol of my rebellion. It was the last straw for him. "This is it? You traded us for this?" he shouted, the sound of his voice disproportionately filling the small space. "A miserable apartment and an old sewing machine? You are embarrassing us. What will people think? That I abandoned my own mother in her old age? You are destroying our family's image." It was then that it happened. The calm I had been cultivating solidified into an unshakable strength. I interrupted him, not by raising my voice, but by lowering it, forcing him to lean in to hear. I looked directly into his eyes, not the eyes of my son, but those of a lost man whom I loved, but whom I could no longer fear. "The shame, my son," I said, with a devastating clarity that silenced him instantly, "is not in this humble apartment. It's in your big, empty house, where you forgot how to love your own mother. I am not abandoning you. I am rediscovering myself, and I pray that one day you rediscover yourself too." A deafening silence fell over the room. My words hung in the air between us, more powerful than any shout. Marco stood there dumbfounded, caught off guard. He expected tears, please, regret. He was not prepared for the truth, spoken with a calm that left no room for argument. For the first time, I saw him without his armor of anger and arrogance. I saw a weak and frightened man. He said nothing more. The fury drained from his face, replaced by an expression of shock and confusion. He took a step back, as if my words had physically pushed him. After a long moment, he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. The final confrontation did not end with an explosion, but with the sound of a soft click. In that moment, I knew I had won. Not against him, but against myself. The guilt I carried, the feeling that I had failed in his upbringing, finally dissolved. I stopped feeling responsible for his happiness or his choices. I was responsible only for my own. The bond of emotional dependence and fear had been severed forever. I was free. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. The first few days in my new home were a symphony of rediscovered small joys. The sound of my own breathing in the peaceful morning silence, the freedom to drink my coffee black, the way I always liked it. Without hearing a comment about how sugar is good for your age, I would open the large living room window and let the sun bathe my face and the dust dance in its rays. A dust that was all mine, in a space that was all mine. I was no longer living on the fringes of someone else's life. I was at the center of my own. With a slightly shaky but proud handwriting, I wrote a small sign and taped it to my apartment door. Elena, sewing repairs and alterations. It was a humble beginning, a whisper in the universe. But to me, it was a declaration of independence as powerful as any shout. My first client was Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B, a kind lady who needed a pair of pants hemmed. She paid me a small amount, but the money itself was secondary. What really mattered was the feeling of holding those bills, earned with my own talent and effort. It was the first time in years that I felt truly productive and valued, not by blood ties, but for my craft. News about the lady with the magic hands on the 4th floor spread through the building, and then through the neighborhood. People brought me their damaged treasures, mothers' wedding dresses to be worn by their daughters, a young man's first suit for a job interview, a child's teddy bear that had lost an eye. I wasn't just fixing clothes. I was restoring memories and mending hearts. My small apartment soon became a hub of activity. The constant hum of my sewing machine was the new soundtrack of my life. I talked with my clients, listened to their stories, and shared a bit of my own. I discovered a community that welcomed me not out of pity, but out of respect for my work. I was building a new family, one woven with threads of gratitude and mutual respect. Over time, the work became so much that the apartment felt small. With my savings growing, I took a new, bold step. I rented a small, empty shop on the ground floor of a building on the neighborhood's main street. I spent a whole week painting the walls a cheerful light yellow. On the glass facade, with the help of a sign painter, I wrote the name of my new venture, Patches of Love. The name was my philosophy. I believed that with love and care, anything broken could be fixed and become even more beautiful, whether it was a piece of fabric or a human spirit. The shop was not just a business. It was a manifesto, a sanctuary for things and people that needed a second chance. The success of Patches of Love surpassed all my wildest dreams. The money I earned was more than enough to live with dignity and comfort. So, I decided it was time to give back. I started using part of the profits to create a small fund that offered free sewing classes to low-income youth in the community. I wanted to pass on my craft, to give them the same tool that had saved me. Seeing the concentrated faces of the young people learning to handle the needle and thread, creating their own little masterpieces, became my greatest joy. I gave them a skill, but they gave me an even greater purpose. I was no longer just Elena, the seamstress. I was teacher Elena, a mentor, a grandmother to an entire community. Meanwhile, in the large, silent house in Pasadena, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Without my presence, the house seemed even emptier. The silence that was once oppressive was now a mirror forcing Marco to face his own reflection. The absence of the smell of my coffee and the sound of my quiet footsteps left a vacuum that no material luxury could fill. The biggest catalyst for his change was Sophia. My granddaughter spoke of me constantly, with an admiration that bordered on worship. "Grandma fixed my dress with magic. Grandma is teaching other kids to do magic too." Marco began to see the strength and dignity he had tried to erase in me through the eyes of his own daughter. Her admiration for me was a silent judgment on him. It was on an autumn afternoon that the climax of this silent journey occurred. The bell on the door of Patches of Love rang, and when I looked up, I saw Marco standing in the entrance. He wasn't wearing his expensive suit, but simple clothes. His gaze was not one of anger, but of nervous hesitation. He seemed smaller, more human. He walked slowly to my counter. In his hands, he held one of his expensive shirts, with a small tear near the pocket. He placed it gently on the wood, without looking me in the eye. After a long silence, he finally raised his face, and I saw a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom," he began, his voice choked with emotion. I was wondering if you could teach me how to fix things." The request was not about the shirt. It was about us. It was about his life, about the family he almost lost, about the love he had forgotten how to give. And in that moment, I knew that his story was also beginning to be mended. 2 years later, the Patches of Love shop is a beacon of light and activity in the community. The walls are covered with colorful creations from the students, and the sound of several sewing machines humming together creates a melody of hope and productivity. I, now 77, walk among the tables with the upright posture of a queen in her domain, my eyes shining with a vitality that belies my age. Beside me, Sophia, now a skilled preteen, helps a younger student thread a needle. She has inherited my hands and my heart. She is the future of Patches of Love, the next link in the chain of resilience and creativity that began on that dark night with a torn blue dress. The bell on the door chimes, and Marco enters, bringing 2 cups of coffee, one black for me and one with milk for him. He no longer wears tight suits but comfortable clothes that seem to fit the man he is becoming. He gives me a kiss on the forehead and hands me the coffee. On weekends, he comes to help, doing small tasks, fixing a shelf, organizing the stock. The interaction between us is easy, warm, rebuilt on the solid foundation of respect and truth. Our family was not destroyed. It was unstitched and sewn back together, stronger and more beautiful than before. Have you done a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness.